Today we're going to talk about how your church can financially survive during the COVID-19 crisis. Right now, today is March 19th as of this recording, and the most optimistic predictions I've seen is that our church closures were going to continue for another 2 months. Those are the most optimistic that I've seen. The most pessimistic, it's getting closer to 2 years rather than 2 months. Now, right now, we don't know, but we do know that if we don't prepare, we are going to be in trouble. So what can you do today to start getting ready for this financial crisis? Well, to survive financially, we need to do 2 things. Number 1, we need to reduce expenses, and number 2, we need to increase income. This simple formula of expenses versus income, this is either going to allow our churches to sink or allow our churches to soar. Really, really simple at its heart. Well, how do we reduce expenses? What are the expenses that we actually have some control on? Well, the first thing we can do to reduce our expenses is we can begin to mothball our facilities. And what I mean by that, simple things like closing doors to unused rooms. If we're not using that sanctuary, and it's unlikely we will be for any time soon, why are we still heating it? Now, we don't want to be turning off our furnace completely because it is still March. Temperatures can easily still go below freezing, and burst pipes are going to be very expensive. But we don't have to keep everything at room temperature. We can dramatically reduce the costs and the temperature in our building, so we're not being hit to heat an empty building that's being unused. So mothballing your facilities is a step that you can take. How do we trim that down? How do we close those doors? How do we close those windows, close those blinds, reduce the temperature so we're going to save some money on some of those utility costs? How do we turn off some of those lights? Quite frankly, our utility costs are staggeringly high, particularly in the winter. This can be an opportunity for some big savings. Second thing we can do is we can reduce program costs. There's a number of programs that we run that we cannot run during the COVID crisis. So are we still paying for those? Are we still paying for a bunch of printed materials that we're not going to be handing out? We need to be looking at our program costs and those kinds of items to see, can we make some relatively painless cost chops there? And number 3, and this is probably the most painful, but in most churches, the number 1 largest expense is staffing. So what we need to do is develop a staffing contingency plan. So this doesn't mean we're going to go out and just lay everybody off. That's not what the contingency plan is about. It's about having a plan that when we hit certain threshold markers, what are we going to do? If we ignore this and say, hey, we're just going to keep everybody as long as possible, we can actually bankrupt our church that way. So we need to be thinking through a contingency plan. Now, how do you do that? How do you build a staff contingency plan? Well, the first thing you need to do is determine those income thresholds. That when income drops below a certain point, who's going to go from full-time to part-time? When it drops below another point, who else is going to go from full-time to part-time? When it drops below another point, who's going to get laid off first? When it drops below another one, who gets laid off next? So we need to determine what those income thresholds are, because ignoring this, we're just going to go bankrupt and we're going to lose everybody. So that's the first step, is to figure out, look at our finances, look at our savings, what are those income thresholds? And quite frankly, if we're able to sustain income, we might be able to do fine. But if not, we're building a contingency plan if income drops significantly. And right now, that's a very real possibility. We've been in lockdown mode for many churches less than a week, and already early reports that I'm getting by talking to our pastors is up to 10% of our people have already been laid off of their jobs. If 10% of our people have been laid off our jobs, we are going to be in some serious trouble financially as churches. So we need to be thinking through this. Second thing we need to do is to create a staff triage order. That in what order are we going to start reducing people's hours? In what order do we start laying people off? Now, there's some things we need to consider about when figuring out that triage order. The first thing is we need to abandon any thought of tenure and hierarchy. This is not a time to say, well, so-and-so's been here longer, so they get to keep their job longer. That's not what's going to allow your church to survive. We need to throw out any thought of tenure. We need to throw out any part of hierarchy. That's not what's going to save us. What we do need to do is prioritize our tech and staff who has the ability to connect. So you might have somebody who's relatively low tier, part-time tech person, and if we were thinking hierarchical and maybe even tenure, well, they might be the first person to go. But right now, what is going to keep your church alive is competent tech. Someone who can run those live streams, run that social media, get you connected to people. Quite frankly, your tech people might be some of the last people you get rid of. So we will need to prioritize that tech. And then staff who have the ability to connect, not during good times, but during this time. So number of people who don't have the ability to connect, and it isn't even their job to connect, might be some of our support staff. Janitorial might be able to be reduced. If we're not using our building, it's not going to get dirty as much. Now, we don't want to abandon janitorial, but we might need to cut back on that. What we want to prioritize, though, is if you've got a children's pastor, for example, who are connecting with the families during this crisis and is there for them and making phone calls and talking with those kids and connecting. If you've got a youth pastor, those people who connect get bumped up higher on the ladder, even though they may not be higher in the hierarchy. So we need to prioritize those tech and those connection people. 3, we need to prepare ourselves and our team for bivocational or volunteer options. Now, some of our churches, this won't apply to, but it does apply to all our churches that have paid staff from 1 to 101. If you're anywhere in that range, this applies to you, because nobody, no matter how big or small your church is necessarily going to be very safe. So what's going to happen if we go to part-time? Well, we might have to look at some bivocational options. And if I'm going to be reducing somebody else's hours, I need to prepare them for some bivocational thinking. And bivocational thinking isn't going to be looking for a normal kind of job because, quite frankly, the whole economy's in turmoil. It's often going to be looking at new kinds of opportunities. When people can't go out, there's going to be a lot of need for delivery, a lot of sort of small kind of jobs, house-to-house kind of work. We need to be thinking creatively that way. And if I'm going to be reducing somebody's hours, these are people that I am personally responsible for them and their families. They've been on my team. They are counting on me to provide for them. And if the day comes that I cannot provide for them financially, I need to take my responsibility as the leader in order to ensure that they're being taken care of the best they can. So I need to be able to prepare them for that. Now, the reason I mentioned volunteer options, and this includes you, we all may end up losing our salaries. Well, does that mean we lose our calling? No, it doesn't mean that we lose our calling. So we need to be prepared, especially if we believe this is going to be a temporary layoff, that this isn't the time just to put up our feet and have a holiday. This is a time for us to volunteer. This is a time for us to demonstrate our calling, that, you know what, we're in this for the real. So that's something very important to do. And it's emotionally and psychologically very important for your staff. If you're reducing their paid hours, when someone is pushed into the place of underemployment or unemployment, one of the biggest felt needs they have is the need for accomplishment, that need that they're feeling like they're making a difference. So we want to give them something to do, something to accomplish. Even though we're reducing their paycheck, we don't want to reduce their contributions. Now, we don't want to force that on somebody, but we want to give them an opportunity that even though I'm not making a paycheck right now or I'm making a reduced paycheck, I'm still doing something that matters. I'm still contributing to the fight. Number 4, inform your people of government support options. Very often at different levels of government, we're getting announcements on a daily level about support for people to pay rent. We're hearing announcements from banks on having mortgage holidays and different things like that. Different levels of government are introducing new unemployment assistance programs. So as the employer, I need to be aware of this and make sure that my people are connected to those right kind of programs. I need to be the expert in my own area because once again, as the employer, it's my moral responsibility to the people who have signed up to follow me to take care of them during this time. Number 5 is if we do have to let somebody go, we do not abandon those we have to lay off. I've seen too many organizations do this, and especially churches, that once you're no longer receiving a paycheck from us, you're dead to us. Do not commit that sin. We need to be taking care of these people. We need to be loving with them. We need to be connecting them. They're in a time of hurt. They're in a time of need. We need to be doing whatever we can to our loyal staff members that we may not be able to keep if we have to enact this kind of contingency plan. The next thing we need to focus on is how do we increase income? Like, quite frankly, I'd like to be able to avoid that whole staff contingency plan altogether. But there's only one way to do that, and that's going to be able to increase the income we're getting. And I'm trusting that even just 1 week of churches being closed, we're already feeling the financial pinch. And if we're not this week, we will be next. And especially when we consider that the first week, we're already seeing 10% of our people losing their jobs. What's going to happen the second week and the third week? What's going to happen when that ripple goes through the economy? Okay, we need to take this very, very seriously. Now, at its heart, we've got to do 2 things here. First is we need to make it easy to give. If we've been depending on passing an offering plate, that's not happening anymore. So we need to give people options on how they can give. And then 2, we need to give them a reason why to give. That's going to be crucial, because if we're just thinking that in the middle of one of the biggest crises they've ever seen in their lives, that they're just going to automatically to remember to be generous, I think we're being naive. So we need to be able to give them that compelling reason why they should be giving at a time like this. Let's take a look at how do we make it easy to give. Well, the first thing is to consider physical giving, because there's still people who want to give physically. They want to hand you a check, they want to hand you money. So what we want to do is provide a sanitized drop-off location. Now that's probably the church or the church office or something like that, but let's make sure it's clean. Let's make sure it's sanitized. Let's sure that if somebody is coming to drop something off, that the next person is not going to come into contagion. Just keep in mind, particularly if someone's giving physically, the probability of them being a senior is much higher, and the probability of them being vulnerable to COVID is much higher. So we want to make sure that if they're coming physically to drop money off, that we're making sure they're coming into a clean environment, and after they leave any services, we're wiping down again. So for the next person who comes in, they're coming into a sanitized environment. Another option is a safe pickup. Some people, particularly seniors, may not feel comfortable, and it may not be safe for them to leave their homes. They may already be under quarantine, but they want to be able to help. In which case, we want to be able to do a pickup, that make arrangements for yourself or somebody else to actually drive to their home in order to get that check. And if you're picking up, again, be safe, no hugs, no handshakes, warm greetings from distance away, gloved hands. We want to keep them safe, we want to keep yours safe. So if we're looking at physical giving, we need to think a little bit more creatively, because a lot of people are going to be shut in. Then we need to look at online giving. Now, maybe your church has never done online giving before, so I'm not going to go into a lot about this. I'm going to mention just one source to make this simple, and that's Tithely. And that's the website right there, tithe.ly, Tithely. Now, the reason I mentioned this is because to sign up for Tithely, you do not have to sign up for a contract. So you can cancel anytime you like. There are no sign-up fees. There's no ongoing fees. They do take a small amount, 2.9% of anything that's given they take for their administrative fee. But it's easy to set up. To set up on Tithely, you need a cell phone. To take a picture of a void check, and you can have your church up and running in 5 minutes. Super easy, super simple. Later down the road, when you have time, you can start looking at other giving options. Maybe you want to use PayPal instead. The setup is a little bit more complicated. Or there's other organizations, Rebel Give, that you might want to consider, or different things like that. That's totally okay. I'm just recommending this one right out of the gate because it's simple, it's easy, and if you don't like it, you can cut it off without any harm or foul. Now some, especially if you've never done online giving before, you may balk at this, hold a second, this 2.9% fee. Well, we can't afford, to have 2.9% of that income go off to some other company, that we want to keep 100%. But when we think that way, we're actually making a bad comparison. What we're doing incorrectly is saying, well, what would you rather have? Is 100 cents a dollar or 97 cents a dollar? Well, obviously I want 100 cents a dollar. That's way better than 97. Why would I use the 97 cents a dollar? That would be stupid. Okay, but that's not the comparison. The correct comparison is, would I rather have 97 cents to the dollar or 0 cents to the dollar? Which makes you more money? Well, obviously 97 cents to the dollar makes a lot more money than 0 cents. And that's the choice you're making. Whether I'm going to pay a fee and actually get money, or I'm not going to pay a fee and get zero money. Really, logically, this is easily worth the cost. It's a very small fee, and yes, when you have time, you can look at options where that fee will be a little bit lower. It's not going to be greatly lower, but you're going to see options out lower. But this is the easiest, the simplest, where you can get ready for this Sunday. And I encourage you to do that right away, because you do not want to lose yet another week of giving. Then we need to look at why someone should give. And it's up to us to give people a reason why they should give. So the first thing is we need to understand where people are at. Like, put yourself in somebody else's shoes. This is what we often call the golden rule. So if I'm Joe in the pew, maybe my wife has been laid off. Maybe I'm worried I'm going to get laid off. I'm worried about my parents being shut in. There's a whole bunch of things that I'm concerned about. I'm worried about toilet paper. I'm worried about meat. I'm worried about hand sanitizer. I'm worried about so many things right now are coming at me. And then I get an email saying, hey, there's online giving at my church. Am I even going to notice that email? We need to understand that emotionally and psychologically, our people are in a state of crisis. That's where they're at. We need to know that. We also need to know that people give to vision more than they give to need. So if we go out there like Oliver Twist, asking our people for gruel, they've got needs too. That's not going to motivate them. What is going to motivate somebody to give is when we can cast a compelling vision that when you give, you're going to make a difference. Because right now, one of the biggest emotional needs our people have is they have a need for empowerment. Science isn't saving them. Their job security is out the window. The trust in the economy, their trust in their savings, all that's been out. People are feeling very, very powerless right now. And when people retreat into themselves and are being forced to cocoon, feeling really powerless, if you've lost your job, you're losing your sense of meaning, you're losing your sense of identity, okay, that's a major emotional crisis. We want to empower someone. What they need is that feeling that, no, I don't have to crawl under a rock and die. There's something tangibly I can do. We need to give people that sense of empowerment. And fundamentally, we are the church. We should never, ever forget who we are. On the Sermon on the Mount, most famous sermon in human history, who did Jesus say was the light of the world? He said, you are the light of the world. He said, you are the salt of the earth. This is the time for us to stand up and be counted. Back in the 2nd century A.D., during the plague of Galen, a smallpox epidemic ravaged the Roman Empire. And Christians, instead of hiding, went out and cared for the sick, not only their own sick, but even the sick of the pagans. Many Christians died doing that. But let me tell you, the whole empire noticed. And many historians treat that event as an opportunity that the church used to grow explosively. That was a turning point for the church. Now, we're not going to be in that same thing. This disease isn't as bad as smallpox, But this is the time to stand up and be counted and give people the opportunity to make a difference. That's the kind of vision we need to be giving to our people, and that's the kind of vision they will give to. Now, what do we need to do here? Well, first, we do need to formulate some kind of an action plan. Now, that's going to be twofold. One is an action plan for our congregation. How am I going to connect to my congregation? I need to do this as personally as possible. So this is going to be phone calls. This is going to be online video. This is going to be online small groups, connection groups, hangout, resources for parents and parenting who got kids at home. This is going to be online Sunday school classes. This is going to be online youth group. But we want to make sure that our people do not feel abandoned, that our people do not feel alone. We need to make personal connections. And I'm not just talking about, hey, just here's a video they can watch. No. I'm talking about we need to have an action plan where we're connecting with people. Some of our people are shut in. Some of our people can't go out and get groceries. We need to identify those needs and meet those needs of our own congregation. And then for our community, like I said, we are to be salt and light in our community. Where are the options and the opportunities in your community right now where you can mobilize your people in a safe manner to make a difference to their neighborhoods? Now, I live in a city, and typically city living in this day and age, I don't know my neighbors. My neighbors don't know me. We don't hang out. We don't talk. I don't even have a sidewalk in front of my house. It's just driveways. So people don't even walk by my house, and I don't walk by theirs. But what I have seen since this crisis, let me tell you, neighbors are being a lot more neighborly. They are open to contact in a way they've never been open before. How are ways can we enable our people to be salt and light in their neighborhoods? So we need to have some kind of an action plan. Here's something that we are doing. Here's something that you can do to make a difference. We need to formulate that action plan. Then we need to cast that vision for involvement. Once we have that plan in place, we need to communicate that plan to our people that here's something you can do. We don't have to take this lying down. We can stand up to this. We can make a difference. This is a time where the church does not have to retreat. This is a time for the church to advance. This is the time for us to shine. Now, this is going to be involvement by volunteering. We want to equip people. Now, maybe there's some maintenance work to be done at the church in very, very small groups, preferably one-on-one or, 2 meters apart or whatever, but we want to give people something that they can actually feel like they're doing. So we want to be giving our people actual volunteered opportunities. It could be picking up prescriptions for people, could be picking up groceries for people, but we want to have some kind of an action plan for involvement by volunteering. And not everybody's going to be able to volunteer, but those who've not been laid off can give. That you can support these actions. You don't have to feel powerless. You don't have to be powerless. That you can do something that's going to make a difference. And quite frankly, economically, that's going to help a lot too. So that's what we need to be able to cast to our people if we're going to give them a compelling reason to give. And quite frankly, when the church behaves like the church, quite frankly, we are going to thrive, not merely survive this crisis. So just remember, yes, we are in a crisis, but for a time such as this, God has decided in all his sovereignty to place you and to place me in the gap at this time. And my prayer is that this will be our finest hour.